In this series of videos, we're going to be looking at the structure and function of probably the most ironically named organ in the digestive system, that being the small intestine. We say that it's ironic because the small intestine is by far the longest organ and also the organ with the greatest surface area in the entire digestive system. Generally, the digestive system is between 26 and 30 feet long, depending on your height, which is approximately between 9 and 10 meters, and over half of that, so between 5 meters and 6 meters long, is the length of your small intestine, representing over half of the total length of the digestive system. And over this series of videos, we're going to look at why exactly that is the case. In fact, the small intestine is so large that we can actually divide it into 3 separate sections, first of which, if we zoom in here and look past the pyloric sphincter where the stomach ejects its contents into the small intestine, this is a section that we call the duodenum, although some people pronounce this duodenum. Now, because this is where the partially undigested food from the stomach containing nutrients that haven't yet been broken down, this is where the undigested food from the stomach and the digestive enzymes at the pancreas meet each other, and therefore most digestion actually occurs almost immediately when the chyme, the partially digested food from the stomach, enters the duodenum. Then, by far the longest section of the small intestine is the dark purple section here. This is what we call the jejunum, and this is, again, by far the longest section of the small intestine, and this is primarily used for the absorption of nutrients. Once the digestion of the partially undigested food is complete, these nutrients can then be transferred from the jejunum into the circulatory system, i.e. into your blood, so the nutrients can be transported to the rest of the body. When we travel past the jejunum, we make it to the final section, which is what we call the ileum, which also is primarily used for the absorption and transfer of nutrients into the circulatory system, but is also meant as the second connection point for any nutrients that are undigested as they enter the large intestine for the recovery of water. And the end of the ileum is connected by another sphincter to the large intestine, although we will look at this in our series on the large intestines. Now, what we're primarily interested in is the small intestine's function from the perspective of absorption, because this is really its primary function. So in addition to being by far the longest organ of the digestive system, it also has the greatest surface area, to the point where if the small intestines were cut open and stretched completely flat, it would occupy a surface area of 180 square meters, making it take up the same amount of space as a small house. So what exactly is the purpose of this, and how is this accomplished? Well, if we zoom in on the walls of the small intestines, we can see, just like the rugae in the stomach, where the walls of the stomach are not completely flat, this is also true for the small intestine as well, only instead of rugae, the small intestine is covered by microscopic structures that we call villi. You actually need a microscope in order to be able to see villi, and the villi in turn actually have villi of their own. So if we look at one villi here, although villi is the plural form, the singular form, because villi is Latin, would be villus, or if we use proper Latin pronunciation, vilus. So if we look at one villus, we can see this villus actually has villi of its own, and these, not surprisingly, are what we call microvilli, and again, their goal is to increase the surface area of the small intestine even more. And I'm just going to fix my spelling mistake here because I neglected to remember that villi is spelt with a double L and let's pretend we didn't see that. So, what exactly are the function of villi? Well, if we zoom into this villus here, we can see that there are tiny blood vessels that enter and then leave the inside of this villus, and these, of course, are the smallest blood vessels in the body. These are capillaries, and their primary function is to absorb any of the digested nutrients that float through the small intestine so that they can be transferred to the rest of the body. And if we look at this process is relatively simple. If you've eaten a particularly heavy meal, the concentration, again, remember that concentration is a measurement of the amount of something that is dissolved in liquid divided by the volume of the liquid that it floats through. So the amount of nutrients that are dissolved in the water of the small intestine is going to be rather high after you've eaten a particularly large meal and after your digestive system has had time to break it down. So if the concentration of nutrients is greater than the concentration of nutrients inside of your blood, then the nutrients will naturally move through the cell membrane and specifically through transport proteins in the cell membranes of cells in the villus structure using a process that we call diffusion. So diffusion is simply a transportation system in which a dissolved particle moves from an area that has high concentration to an area that has low concentration. So because your blood is constantly moving, nutrients don't stay in one place, and so there will generally be fewer nutrients in your blood than inside of your small intestines, particularly after eating a large meal. The problem is, as we've already established with the stomach, is every human eating 24 hours a day, 7 days a week? That answer is obviously no. No human has the capability to keep eating non-stop, even if we wish that we could sometimes. Now, what this means is if diffusion works by something that is dissolved moving from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration, if our small intestine is empty, this would mean that nutrients would actually have the ability to leave and enter the small intestine, and eventually they would be excreted from the body with the rest of our waste, and we do not want this to happen. Therefore, regardless of whether our small intestine has more nutrients or less nutrients than our blood, we need a transportation system that will always move nutrients in a single direction from your intestine into your blood. And this is what we call active transport. And basically, you can think of active transport kind of like a pump. Now, obviously, a pump, such as the pump that's used to inflate tires, or a water pump that is used to forcibly pump water from one location to another, obviously a pump is going to require energy, and this is why many people feel very lethargic or very energy deprived after eating a large meal, because a lot of energy that you consume or that your body consumes after eating is spent transporting the nutrients that from the food that you have eaten into your blood. And this consumption of energy often explains the quote-unquote food coma that puts people into a very fatigued state after eating a large meal. And because of this active transport system, we can say that the what little nutrients there may be in the small intestine will always be actively transported, meaning in this case that it requires energy in order to make sure that nutrients only flow one way, and guaranteeing that they will end up in your circulatory system, in the blood, in the capillaries. Now, if we want to follow the pathway of nutrients as they are carried away from your small intestine. If we follow the capillaries, eventually this is going to lead to a blood vessel that travels toward the liver, which has many functions, and one of its functions is the garbage disposal of the body. And one reason why the nutrients that are transported out of the small intestine are sent to the liver first is for the purpose of detoxification. So in the event when you've ingested food that isn't good for you, or nutrients that are not good for you, like alcohol, like caffeine, or large amounts of unhealthy nutrients like trans fats, these can be transported to the liver, where they are either broken down or converted into a less harmful form. But even in the event of transporting regular nutrients such as glucose, remember that in the previous video we talked about the role of insulin. One of the reasons why regular nutrients will want to be transported to the liver is for the purpose of storage. For example, a large portion of your body's glucose is actually stored in the liver as the glucose polymer glycogen, and this is another reason why nutrients are transported first to the liver and then to the heart to be pumped around the rest of the body. In the next video, we're going to look in more detail at the actual processes that are happening within the small intestine, starting with the nutrients that are specifically digested in the duodenum. So stay tuned for a detailed interaction about how the small intestine, pancreas, and liver all work together to conduct some of the most specialized digestion in the body.